Today will be fascinating as we answer the question, where does the Antichrist come from? And how can we figure that out from the genealogies in Genesis? Join us today as we see how what we learn in Genesis ties in with end times. Good morning, welcome to our Women's Bible Study. Super glad you are joining us today. Today is going to be one of those days that we're studying Genesis, and you're going to be like, what? We're going to talk about genealogies? That sounds so incredibly boring. But today is going to be really, really fascinating and one of my favorite things to do because I love to teach on end times. So when I came to Genesis, this particular section in Genesis, it's genealogies. And I'm like, what am I going to do with that? I had no earthly idea until I came to one word, Magog. Magog. And that threw me onto this end times battle with Gog and Magog. And so I get to tie this all in together. And I wanted to do it this way because I wasn't exactly sure how to make genealogies exciting for you. So what I want to do today is talk about this in light of the Antichrist and where he could possibly come from, where he most likely will come from. And it actually does tie into the genealogies. Noah had these three sons. We have Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And they're going to spread out into the world. And we're going to tie all this in. And then in a little while, we're going to play a Joel Richardson video. And that will help him. He's going to help us. What we just learned, he's going to kind of fill in the blanks for us, and we all love Joel Richardson, so yay for that. Now, to begin with, Noah's sons now are going to move out into the world. We'll pick it up in Genesis 10. This is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. And then it gives us this huge list of names of people. And some are going to go to Asia and China, and some are going to go to Saudi Arabia and Africa, and some are going to go to England and Sweden. And you can see their descendants, filling in this earth. And it's through their descendants, the descendants of Noah, that the world is going to be populated with completely different groups. Now, a lot of us ask, well, which one of these guys did the Chinese or the Vietnamese people come from? Or where did the Swedes and the Danish come from? And where did the Egyptians and the Africans come from? How does that all play out? And honestly, I spent more time on this stupid lesson because the information is just overwhelming. And so I'm going to give you a disclaimer right up front, and I'm going to say this. To the best of my ability, I think this is right. Okay, and that's saying there's a lot of study that went into this, and there's no way to be 100% certain of everything that I'm going to say on where every person went to. You have a good idea, but I could have missed something here and there. So what we're going to first see is Noah's three sons. We'll talk about them, all of them today. But after this chapter, it's going to stop talking about Ham, pretty much, and it's going to stop talking about Japheth. And what's going to happen is everything's going to be focused on the lineage of Shem. If we look at our, there he is. If you look at this is our table of descendants of Noah. If you look at Japheth and Ham and you go to Shem, you see that Shem has the 2, 4, 5 boys. Straight down to the left, you see Peleg, Rhea, all the way to Abram. So next week we'll start, I don't know if it's next week, maybe it's next week, I can't remember. We're going to start on this whole Abraham, because that's the lineage that is going to come Jesus. So you've got Abraham, then his Isaac and Jacob, and we just go down from there. So that all comes from the lineage of Shem. Now, what I want to talk about is the lineage of some of these people in light of what's going to happen as the world starts coming to a close, as the return of Jesus gets closer and closer. Because I want us to see that, and I say this all the time, that the Bible is the most amazing book ever written because it was written by God himself. Every word in the Bible is inspired by him. And I always say this, God tells us exactly how everything began. He just does. We see this in Genesis. We know because we know what the Bible says. And we can see this beginning where these different people groups and these beginning nations, we can see how everything's starting to form. But then we're going to see this, that God tells us exactly how everything will end. And that's my favorite thing to talk about. Because God gives us prophecies all through the Bible, and he tells us who to look out for, what people group, what nations, what we need to see to fill in the end times. And so I want to kind of talk a little bit about that today. Genesis 10, verse 1 says this. This is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, Noah's sons, who themselves had sons after the flood. Last week we ended with Japheth, and it was this whole that his territory would be enlarged. And let's look at these. Sorry, right here. The sons of Japheth are Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. Now, some of you, if you know your end times, a lot of those words are going to stick out because you're going to be like, oh, I know where this is going. Now, here's where it seems that these people, his people group, landed. Japheth, 7 sons, they went to Europe. Some went to Iran, India, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Swedes, Norwegians, Russians, keep that in your mind, Slavs, Bulgarians, Romanians, Bohemians, Poles, the whole thing. Germany, Turkey, keep that in mind, ancient Spain, England. So it's almost like these were more Caucasian people, and this is the group that migrated to all these different places. Now, I want to go back and talk about, right here, the sons of Japheth. I want you to remember these. Gomer, Magog, we've got the other ones, Tubal, and Meshach. Now I want you to look at those names because we are going to see those names again when we get to Ezekiel. Now there is going to be an end times, if you know anything about the Bible and end times prophecies, if you watch prophecy stations, there's going to be this war of Gog and Magog, and most people think that it's Russia. And now it's kind of a bigger thing now. And if you watch prophecy programs, they're going to be like, we told you it's Russia, Russia, Russia. And then, you feel like Trump gets involved and says, that's all I ever hear is Russia, Russia, Russia. But I always heard that. And I always heard that growing up that Russia was going to invade Israel in this final Gog and Magog war and whatever. But here's what I've learned as I was studying this is I don't think that that's really true. Like if you can take Magog, and now that you saw where all these guys went to, Magog, he could have come from England or Ireland or Germany, or there's a lot of different places that he could have come from. But because Magog, as we saw that list, they settled a whole bunch of different places. Now, as I'm doing this lesson, I'm trying to figure out how to make it exciting to you guys. And when I read the whole thing about Magog, it threw me on to Joel Richardson's video on Gog and Magog, and that's why I changed my lesson to make it end times, because I want you to see how all of this plays, not just in Genesis 10, but throughout the entire Bible and how this affects our end times. So I texted Joel and I said, hey, can I steal your lesson? And he's like, absolutely. You can not only steal it, but I will send you all my maps so that you have something along with it. So this is what I want you to see. Because if you listen to specific prophecy websites, then you probably will have seen some of these maps. And what we're looking for is, right here, we're looking for Gomer, Magog, Tubal, and Meshach. Okay, because there is this end time battle between, it says Gog and Magog. It'll happen, Ezekiel, it will happen sometime during the 7 years of tribulation. There's a wide variety of when it will happen. I believe this happens right around the time that Jesus actually after 3.5 years is when I think this will happen. There's a lot of, we don't know exactly, but if you listen to a lot of Joel's stuff, he explains way more better than I can. But anyway, here's what I want you to see. One prophecy website says this, that Gog is Russia. Then you see Tubal and you see Meshach. They're all in that whole Russia area. You've got Magog, okay? So they have Gog as an actual place. Now, I don't think that's true. I think Gog is actually the Antichrist. And I hopefully we can explain that a little bit better. We have Gomer all the way down here, Switzerland, France area. So you see there, so if I were this prophecy person teaching, I'd be like, oh, Gog is going to come and invade little baby Russia, and this is where all these kids of, and grandkids of Japheth went to. Okay, now, nobody really knows that, so here is another one. They put Rosh, or Russia, up there. They have Magog down here in all the Kazakhstans and all that kind of stuff. So you can kind of see where this one lands here. They do get Cush and Put right. Those are the right ones. But you can see, like, all these websites are going to say something different. Here's another one. They have Magog up here in Russia. They have Meshech, Togarmah, Gomer, and Tubal all in Turkey. Then you've got another one here, and you can see Magog up in Russia, and then you've got the other ones. So it's all over the board, so just so you know that. So that's why this lesson totally made me crazy. But let's look at Ezekiel's prophecy about the end times war, and you'll actually start seeing these names all over again. So let's start at Ezekiel 38. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, set your face against Gog. Okay, now, Joel does a really great job in explaining why Gog is considered the Antichrist. Okay, it's a name, and it was a name that was previously used. I think it's in Genesis. I didn't write down the actual name. So he's saying, set your face against Gog. And where is Gog from? Gog is from the land of Magog. All right, so the idea is, okay, so you've got the Antichrist, and he's from this specific land. And it's like the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal prophesy against him. Now remember, those are all names we just saw in Genesis, the sons and the lineage of Japheth. Okay, so that should answer our question, because a lot of people will write in and they'll be like, hey, is Donald Trump the Antichrist? Is Barack Obama the Antichrist? And the answer is no, okay? Wherever this Magog, this land of Magog is, this is where the Antichrist will come from. So, where is that? Let's look at verse 3. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I am against you, O Gog, chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. I will turn you around, put your hooks in your jaws, and bring you out with your whole army, your horses, your horsemen fully armed, and a great horde with large and small shields, of all them brandishing their swords. Persia, Cush, and Put will be with them. Okay, now, we'll stop here for a second. There will be this coalition of nations that are going to come against Israel. That's what this is all about. They're trying to get rid of little baby Israel off of the face of the earth, okay? And these people think they're going to do it. Run by the Antichrist. They're going to have a coalition. They're all going to come against him. And these are the players that are going to be involved. So you have Persia Put with them with all their shields. Gomer, we just saw Gomer in Genesis, with all its truth, and Beth Togarmah from the far north with all its troops, the many nations with you. This is a huge battle that's going to happen. Now, we know when we look at Persia, Persia is Iran. Persia has always been Iran since the beginning of time. So just know that going into it. Cush and Put are descendants of Noah's son Ham, okay, the kind of the bratty kid. So we know that Cush in the Bible is Sudan, Ethiopia, North Africa. Libya is also North Africa. So one of those let's see if I can go back to that. Where is that? Right here. So you can see Put and Cush down there. That is all in North Africa. So what you see is above them is Egypt, and then you have to the right of Saudi Arabia, but you're going to see how this is all going to fill in really soon. Now, the question we have to ask then is, where is Magog? Like, where do most people think it's from? Because it's not a prophecy website, because Russia sells really well right now. Russia, the Ukraine, Putin, everyone, we're going to invade the land of Israel. Well, and it sells a lot of books, I'm assuming, at this particular time, but I don't think it's really true. So let's look at some atlases. Let's see what these, if I can get to it, yay. Sorry, I went way far. Here you go. Here's the Zondervan Atlas of the Bible. Okay, now we're not talking about prophecy websites. We're saying these are atlases of the Bible that Zondervan came out with. He puts Gomer, Magog, Meshech, and Tubal, even to Gomorrah, right in the middle of Turkey. It's Turkey, okay? So let's go to another one. Let's see the Holman Bible Atlas. They place Magog, Gomer, Togarmah. You'll see a bunch of those other ones. We'll talk about them in a little while. All of these guys where? Asia Minor, Turkey. All of these places are in Turkey. They're not up in Russia. Here's another one. We have the IVP Atlas of Bible History. Tubal, Meshach, Magog. You've got Javan. You've got all these. Right center right there is in Turkey. You have the New Moody Bible Atlas of the Bible. Same thing. Meshach, Magog, Gomer, Tubal, all this right in the heart of Turkey. So what this does is this makes a lot more sense when you look at other verses in the Bible. That Gomer, Magog, Tubal, and Meshach is Turkey, not Russia. And people say, well, it's because it's the far north. Well, if you really look at it, this is north. The far north, like most of the things that happen in the Bible weren't all the way up in Russia. Most of it happened in this particular area right around here. When you look at Micah 5, verse 5 and 6, it actually calls the Antichrist the Assyrian. Now, when Micah was written, Assyria was our modern-day Turkey. Daniel 11 calls him the king of the north. Turkey is north of Israel. So that would make sense at that particular time when these were written. Ezekiel 38 and 39, Gog from the land of Magog would be, the Antichrist would come from Turkey. So we can be sure that he's going to come from this general area. And so what we need to be looking out for is what is going on with Turkey. Always be looking from the news, like what kind of a player are they going to be? Because it sounds like he will come from Turkey, and then he'll get this whole coalitions of nations surrounding him that will all come and try to come against Israel. So let's look at Joel Richardson's videos. He's saying that there's two different ways to figure out how to figure out which one of these kids and their descendants where they went to, and it's kind of fascinating. So I thought we would play that, and you can see this.
Is Russia Gog of Ezekiel 38 and 39's oracle concerning Gog of Magog? Is Russia the nation or the entity that the prophet Ezekiel was pointing to that would lead a massive invasion of Israel in the last days? The answer is no. Now, how do we know that? Okay, when we look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, we have a listing of nations that would be led by this end-time evil dictator referred to as Gog. It says that he's from the land of Magog. He's the chief prince of Meshach and Tubal. He rules over the area of Gomer and Beth Togarmah, and he's partnered with Persia, Cush, and Put. Okay? Now, how do we understand what these names mean? What did they mean to Ezekiel and his immediate audience? How are we to understand them today? Well, there are two primary methods of interpreting these different names. Okay, the first one is what I refer to as the historical wild goose chase method. So let's take, for example, Magog. Now, in the writings of the historian Josephus, Josephus says that the Magogians became the Scythians. Okay, so the Magogians, they migrated out of the region of modern-day Asia Minor or Turkey. They went through Bulgaria, Romania, Moldova, Ukraine. Eventually, they made their way up to Russia. They spread out all the way across the Russian steppes. They intermarried with some of these Scandinavian sort of Vikings that came down, the Rusian peoples. And from these peoples, we have the Russians. So if you trace the Magogian peoples, their migration, their intermarrying history, down through history, you end up with Russia. Okay, so this is where people would say that Gog is from Magog. If you do this sort of DNA tracing, Magog becomes Russia. And that's by following the historical DNA bloodline wild goose chase method. Okay? The other method of interpretation is what I call the geographic correlation method. And this is simply the historical grammatical method, which is to say, how did Ezekiel and his immediate audience at the time the prophecy was given understand these names? Well, at the time of the prophecy, Magog was simply Turkey. Meshach, Tubal were simply Turkey. Persia was modern-day Persia, Iran. Okay, Cush and Put. We're talking Sudan and Libya, North Africa, etc. We just simply look at the areas where they were located when the prophecy was given, And then we correlate them to modern-day nations, people groups, tribes, etc. It's very easy. Now, if we do the historical wild goose bloodline DNA sort of method, the problem is that we have to be consistent and do it with every single name. We can't just do it with Magog. So, for example, Gomer, Gomer became the Gomeri. They became the Cimmerians. They became the Gauls. They became the Celts. They became the Germans. They became the Irish. Now, you'll see a lot of prophecy books that say the coming Russian invasion of Israel. And that sells well because in the United States, in particular, the consumers of prophecy literature are often very against communism or Russia or these former communist bloc states, etc. And picking on Russia plays well. The problem is that you don't also see a book called The Coming Irish Invasion of Israel. But if these prophecy authors were consistent, they would have to do just that. If you trace down the historical bloodline, migration, intermarrying patterns of all of these peoples, you end up with, these are the Japhetic peoples, which is to say they're the children of Japheth. They are the Caucasian children of Noah. You end up with South America. You end up with the American invasion of Israel. You end up with Canada. You end up with Australia and New Zealand, etc., etc., etc. You end up, yes, with Russia. You end up with most of the Western world. Okay, however, if you simply stick to the geographic correlation method, then you have a Turkish-led, Middle Eastern, North African invasion of the land of Israel. Of course, that makes much more sense, and it aligns with that which all of the other biblical prophets say. Now, here's where it gets tricky. And I've done this very carefully. I've worked through numerous books, and I've said, how does this particular author identify the names to arrive at the conclusions that they arrive at? And what many of them do is they switch methods midstream. So with, for example, Magog, they'll use the historical bloodline wild goose chase method to arrive at Russia. But with some of the other names, they hold firm to the geographic correlation method. So it's almost like a card trick, switching methods midstream, and most people reading the books, they just take an author as an authority. They don't really question or analyze their methodology. But when you switch methods midstream, it really is like a magic trick, and you can create virtually any map of different nations, any enemies that you don't like, and you can throw them in there and make them part of the story. But the bottom line is we need to be consistent. We need to use a responsible method of interpretation, which I would argue is the historical geographic correlation method. And most of all, we need to be consistent. We need to choose a method and stick with it. So either we go with the historical wild goose chase method and end up with all of the Western world, including the United States, just as equally as Russia is going to invade Israel, or we use the correlation, the historical geographic correlation method, which says that we'll probably have a leader from the region of Turkey, the heart of the Middle East, Turkey, Syria, Iraq, that general region, who's going to lead an invasion of Middle Eastern, North African nations into the land of Israel.
Okay, is that fascinating? Did we just throw you all off? Are you all like, I hate this Bible study, and Lisa gets on her stupid end time stuff. I love it, but it's so fun to see Genesis, and then we're moving in, and you can see it in the end time stuff. I want to read really quick some of this Ezekiel 38 and this battle that we're talking about that talks about all these lands. Let's see, Ezekiel 38. Okay, let's read this so you kind of understand what we're talking about. This will be something that hasn't happened yet. It will be coming. Like I said, it'll probably be somewhere probably after the midpoint of the 7 years of tribulation. And like I said, the Antichrist will be on the scene. He'll have this coalition of nations. And this is what will happen. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gathered about you, and take command of them. After many days, you will be called to arms. In future years, you will invade a land that is recovered from war. So we know this is Israel, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel. I think it's next week. I can't remember if it's next week or the week after. I'm going to do a whole chart of how there was nobody in Israel, and now there's over 7 million people there. It's exactly what Ezekiel's prophesying. The people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel. They all came back, which has been long desolate. They had been brought out from the nations, and now they all live securely. you and all your troops and the many nations with you. So this is how we know that Antichrist will have all these nations that will go with him. Advancing like a storm, you will be like a cloud covering the land. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind and you will devise an evil scheme. He's saying this about the Antichrist. He's saying, on that day, you're going to get into your mind, let's get rid of Israel. Let's get a coalition of all these nations together. Verse 11, you will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and without gates and bars. Now people will go, well, Israel has a wall around it. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking, it's not a fortified, thing where you, it's not that. I mean, Israel is pretty well open to anyone at this particular time. It says, I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins, the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living in the center of the land of it. That just says the land of Israel has just come back. It's like it's an amazing piece of land. He says, you will come from your place in the far north. Now that's why people go, well, it's got to be Russia because it's far north. But I think Joel kind of dispelled that. You and many nations with you, all of them riding on horses, a great horde, a mighty army. You will advance against my people Israel like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, O Gog, O Antichrist, I will bring you against my land so that the nations may know me when I show myself holy through your eyes, before your eyes. What's amazing is that this is all, like, it's not like God's like, oh, what's going on? No, he knows exactly what's going on. This is something that he's allowing to happen. So anyway, I thought that was kind of fascinating. So I think sometimes we think the Bible is this book of laws and do this, don't do this, or kings, but it's really a history of what's going to happen on planet Earth. Okay, we've seen how it begins, we see how it ends, and God tells us through all these prophets, especially like Ezekiel, like what's going to happen. And he's giving this to us so that we can look out and be prepared for what's coming, and we can see it through all these, different people groups all the way back to Genesis. So let's continue. Genesis 10:3. The sons of Gomer are I can't even say these words. Ashkenaz, Ripta, Tagamara, the sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim. Now these are maritime people spread out into their territories by their clans within their nations with their own language. Now if you look at all of those people and you see this map, you can see Kittim, Rodanim, all the same names right there, and they're right by the water there and this is right below Turkey. So it just kind of all fits and it makes sense when you start looking through it. Now, let's move over here to the sons of Ham and work through his stuff. The sons of Ham are Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. Now, we've already talked about a couple of these. These are the sons that are going to go here. Egypt, Africa, Somalia, Sudanese, Libya, Canaan, Saudi Arabia, parts of Iraq, Japan, Vietnamese, Taiwanese, Chinese, Eskimos. You kind of get, this is where this group of people. Now, we've already talked about this. Cush is Sudan and Ethiopia. Put is Libya, so we're going to fill this map in right now. If you look at that, we see, Put and Cush. We see up there is Russia, which the red, which whatever. You see Turkey, which is the yellow. Little baby Israel, just right there in the center. Remember, this whole nation, they're going to come against Israel. And then we see, because we want to fill in this map, we're going to see, so you see Egypt there, and then you see Saudi Arabia. Those guys are pretty close to Israel. Look at another country that we're going to see fill in that's going to be part of this coalition. Daniel 11, verse 42 says this, He, meaning the Antichrist, shall stretch out his hand against the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. Egypt will be a part of this coalition. He shall have power over the treasures of gold. So the Antichrist is going to have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt. Also the Libyans and Ethiopians, we already saw that, Put and Cush, and fall on their heels. So you can see that all through the Bible, God's like filling in all these places that we're finding out about in Genesis so that it'll make sense in the end times. So we can kind of see this. Now, I want to show this map to you because the first time that Joel put this up on the screen, it kind of made my stomach drop. This is what's going on in the Middle East. In the Middle East, it used to never be like this. So, like when you used to think, like, oh, the Antichrist. If you read the Left Behind series, and the Antichrist is coming from Romania, Nikolai, Carpathia, or whatever, but it's not shaping out like that at all. okay? What we're seeing here is something we've never seen before, and all of the black are Muslim majority nations now. They used to never be. It used to not be like that. And now that's being filled in. We see down there Israel. Now we see Egypt right below to the left. We just heard they're part of this coalition. You see Sudan and they're down there to the left. But to the right, it's like, well, Saudi Arabia, what's the deal with them? Well, let's look at the sons of Ham. The sons of Cush. Cush is Sudan and Ethiopia. And it gives all these words right here. The sons of Ramah are Sheba and Dedan. Where are Sheba and Dedan? Saudi Arabia. You see how that works? So all of these people in Genesis, all of their descendants are flowing into all these different lands, and we're seeing it fill in the end time scenario. It's like the most fascinating, fun thing of my life, okay? So here's a picture here. You can see little baby Israel right there. You see Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Sudan, Iran, Iraq, Turkey. Like you could see the whole thing now. They're all Muslim majority nations. That's why I believe, like Joel does, that the Antichrist will be a Muslim coming out of this area up here in Turkey. All right, let's move away from that and let's talk about another place that was always a thorn in like Israel's side, and this is Babylon. Okay, so the Bible talks about Babylon. Babylon and Assyria were both arch enemies of Israel. So let's go down and look at this. The sons of Ham. Ham, remember, is the wicked son who laughed at his dad. Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. So if we look down here at the sons of Ham, we see Canaan. Now, through this lineage, we go to verse 8. Cush was the father of Nimrod. Okay? Nimrod grew to be a warrior, a mighty warrior on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord. That is why it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord, the first centers of his kingdom were Babylon and a bunch of words I can't say, Erech, Akdad, Calneh, and Shinar. From that land he went to Assyria, where he built Nineveh, Rehoboth, Calah, that's a great city, and Rezin, which is between Nineveh and Calah, blah, blah, blah. So what we have is Babylon is our modern-day Iraq. Assyria is northeastern Turkey and northern Iraq. So you can kind of see everything like filling in from there. And then it gives a whole bunch of other names here that I'm not even going to read. Philistines came from, you can see all those. And then it says Canaan was the father of all these different people. Now look at this. Now remember, Canaan is the grandson of Ham. This is the one that we talked about last week where Noah says, cursed be Canaan, cursed be this particular son, because his descendants are, who are they? They're all the ones who came up against Israel in the land. The Amorites, the Jebusites, the Gigorites, the Hivites, all the ites, the blah, blah, blah. So you can kind of see what goes on there. So you kind of see this picture of what's going on and who goes where. Now, the final verses, I don't even think I put them up here. The final verses are going to be the table of Shem right here. We've talked about Ham. We've talked about Japheth. They're verses 21 to 31, which I'm not going to read because it's literally just name after name after name. But for Shem, this is what it's going to look like. Shem had 5 sons, and so his descendants would go here. They would be known as the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Arabians, Bedouins, Moabites, Jordanians, Palestinian, Assyrian, Western Asian Minor, Damascus, Northern Arabia, Jordan, Asian Minor, North Africa, Chaldeans, Iraqis, Lebanon, blah, blah, blah. So you can kind of see that whole area fill in. And we're not going to go through each one of their names because next week we're going to see how God takes the lineage of Shem and one of the descendants, Abraham, and how that's going to move on now out into the earth where it'll be the countdown to Jesus is kind of what I want to talk about. So all that to say, I think the Bible is amazing. And we can see how amazing it is when we start looking at genealogies and maps. And we can start getting a picture of, we now know in Genesis how the world began, and now we're starting to see how the world is shaping up. And we're getting ready for this huge Middle East battle, okay, when the Antichrist shows up, which will have all-out war on Israel. And after that, we'll be ready for the return of Jesus. And we can actually put all that together from the names of people in the table of nations in Genesis 10. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you that you're letting us know ahead of time on what's going to happen, what to look out for. God, you're so amazing that all through the Bible, you just give us hints of places to look for. Thank you for your word in Genesis. Thank you for your word in Ezekiel. Thank you for your word in Revelation. Thank you, God, for that you've given us this whole picture. Help us now to go out into the world and live like we are one of yours. Live expecting to be followers of yours until the day we die or the day you come to get us. We thank you for that. In Jesus' name, amen.